I'm probably the only person who went through every single one of those documents, every single one of them. And, and then started just putting this stuff together. And then I cross-referenced it with Perkins and started reading everything. And then I'm like, this is the story right here. And then you can see who was willing to talk, who wasn't willing to talk. And you can go down and see exactly what happened. It's pretty crazy.
It's incredible. And who's dead already?
Mm-hmm.
Grace is dead, isn't he?
No. He's at the University of Southern Illinois Carbondale. He's teaching in he's in the same position that he was back then. I've been going ballistic on them. I'm like, you do know that this guy that lied to me, that protected Strauss, is working for you. Now he says that he got him fired, but
he didn't get him fired.
Well, he got him suspended, but then he just got retired. Got him retired.
Students.
Yeah, he just got him stopped.
He could still go in and take a shower.
Yeah, absolutely. So the crazy thing about Grace is that.
Did he talk to them? He talked to Perkins.
No. Well, he refused to talk to them unless they indemnified his legal fees or whatever. Yeah. And so he refused to talk to them. And then I was talking to this Carbondale news reporter about the whole thing. And so he started talking to me. Well, Grace, I guess, got a lot of pressure. And that Carbondale guy wrote me back and he said, hey, I don't want you to say anything to any of the media yet, but Grace is actually doing an interview with me. I'm like, he's talking? And he's like, I'm like, well, I want to know what he says because I want to be able to respond to it.
Yeah.
So he let me know some of the stuff he said. And that article, I can send you it. I rip him apart in that article. And not by anything but his own words. Like he said in the article, I thought Steve was satisfied at the results of the meeting. And so then I pulled up his words from 1996 that said, I never accepted the results of that meeting. And said, so he's calling himself a liar, and so that article was really bad for him, and they just deposed him. My lawyers did for the lawsuit. They said 7 hours. They kept him in there, and I gave them a list of stuff for that guy, because, honestly.
Why do you think he was covering for this guy, knowing he was abusing students?
In Grace's defense, and I'll be completely non-partial here, is that he came in 94. This is almost 14 years into 14 years into Strauss's abuse, and one person had complained before me, 3 days before me. Then I complained. But the problem is that he looked me in the eye and told me nobody had ever complained before. And then he didn't document anything about either one of our complaints until that third person, and that third kid went crazy, knocked stuff around and screaming. And so at that point, Grace knew, because I told him, I said, I'll keep your letter as an insurance policy. So I'd threatened him. And so he knew at that point, I have to, I'm in trouble if I don't. So then he documented everything about me and student A year later when it was covering his butt. And that's just gross.
It's unreal. You ready? Are we rolling on everything? Okay. I'm just letting you know that we're rolling.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay, and I want to make sure, do you want me to refer to you as Stephen Snyder-Hill or Steve Snyder-Hill?
It doesn't matter.
And if it's Stephen, it's P-H-E-N.
Yes.
And it's S-N-Y-D-E-R
hyphen
Hill.
Yep.
Okay.
That's it.
All right, Stephen, first of all, it's incredible what you have documented in this case. But take me back to that day when you are, how old were you? 18, 19?
Well, actually, I was 25 when that happened.
Because you were in the military.
Mm-hmm. I got started school a little bit later.
Okay, because you were in the military. So you're a young man who goes in because you have a medical complaint. Take me through that day and how startled and possibly frightened you were.
So a lot of the quarters of OSU, I didn't have insurance because I couldn't afford it or whatever. In that particular quarter, I did have insurance. So I went to the medical center and told them I had a lump on my chest. And somebody had told me men can get breast cancer. And I was like, I've never heard of that, but it concerned me. So I went in and the nurse triaged me to Strauss. And so he came in. And, I'm not going to say exactly the specific details just because save your viewers that, but he molested me the same way that he did others. And a lot of intimidation. I mean, my complaint form, you can read through it, and it said I couldn't look him in the eye. He asked me if I was gay. He asked me if I had trouble sleeping with one person, asked me if I wanted something else sexually. He was like getting really gross in and I just knew it was inappropriate. And then he did a full, anal exam and a rectal exam. And then I knew that it was really bad when he put me down to check my chest. And he sat there and rubbed it, and he had an erection, and he pushed it against me and just held me there and the whole time while he was doing it. And so I can't even tell you how long that went on, that I had to sit there and I sympathize with people when they come out about sexual abuse, because you can't put yourself in somebody's place and understand how you'd react, because it's not something you expect. You go to the doctor and you think, I'm here for, I'm vulnerable. Strauss made me get completely naked for this exam. I knew something was wrong with that, but you just can't put yourself in that place. And when I was challenged later by Grace for that same question, he said, why didn't you stop it? I said, you don't understand how you're going to react when you're put in that place. I said, if I had come in and you'd given me these forms and you'd given me an option to have a chaperone or to say I'm not comfortable with body parts being checked, then maybe I would have felt more comfortable and I would have gone into it more comfortable. But it's just something that you don't expect a doctor or dentist or teacher or anything to do to you.
Especially when you go in there for a legitimate medical concern.
Right, you're just trying to get help.
And suddenly this person who you were looking to help you is molesting you.
Right, it's disgusting. And then on my complaint form, it said that I thought about it all night long, and there was a lot of intimidation. It's a person of power, it's a doctor, a medical doctor. I was a student, I was a dietetic student. So, my concern was that I don't want to ruin somebody's career, and I don't know how that would impact my career, because I had to get an internship. And, you go against a medical doctor, and what are people going to do to you, So there's a lot of scary thoughts there. But, the greater good got to me, and I was like, I have to do something. So I called them the very next day.
And when you made this report, did you think you were believed? How was your complaint received?
So I called and went through the complaint on the phone, and they wrote everything down. And then Ted Grace, which was the medical director at the time, called me back and said that he talked to Strauss about it, and Strauss denied everything. And I didn't accept that. I told him, I don't believe he did this to me, and you have to believe me. And I asked him, what are my recourses? What can I do? And so he set up a meeting with me, Strauss, Louise Dowse, which was their head of their counseling, and took me into a 2-hour meeting where Strauss screamed at me. Tell me right there, we would never do that to a sexual assault survivor today. You never put them in front of their abuser and then let their abuser berate them, which they did to me. And went through this 2-hour meeting, and at first Strauss, his demeanor was really jovial, and he was really nice. He was introducing himself to everybody. And as the meeting went on and I started getting into the details, once I got to the part where I talked about the erection, he just slammed his hand down, and it was like a demon came out of him, screaming at me and just saying, you're going to ruin my reputation. And Grace and Dowse and everybody just stopped, and they were just like surprised, like nobody knew what to say. Like everybody knew it was completely scary. And the more I read about all the stuff that he did with their lawyer, and like he went into her office and refused to leave, I just think that was the way he interacted with people. He was very arrogant and very just nasty.
You got some promises from Ted Grace at that time, and at the time you thought you might be the only one, didn't you?
I thought I was the only one, because that's what they told me. So yeah, Ted Grace called me back after the meeting, because he knew I didn't accept it. His own notes said that I never accepted the results of the meeting. And so he called me back afterwards and said, he's still denying it, and I said, here's the thing. I said, all I want is for this to never happen to anybody else. So I want 3 promises from you. I want you to promise me that it's never happened before to another kid. I want you to promise me if it ever happens again that I get a call, because I will not let this happen to anybody else. And I said, and I want you to document it in his file. And I said, if you can promise me those 3 things, then I'll just go away. And he said, yeah, I can do that. And so I said, great, put it in a letter to me. And there was silence on the phone. I could tell that bothered him a lot. But sure enough, 2 days later, I think I got a letter. And the letter, he kind of skirted around the issue. He didn't say he would call me. He said, we'll consider future complaints with prior complaints. But in that letter, he said, we've never had another complaint about Strauss, only positive comments. So to my knowledge, out of everything in the Perkins report or anybody that's come forward, that's the only physical evidence that actually says that a member of OSU lied to a student directly, because I found out in the Perkins report a kid came in 3 days before me. 3 days.
How does that make you feel? I mean, this doctor who was trying to get you would agree to shut up and go away was basically lying to you.
That part is infuriating, but you have to think psychologically. When you put this stuff away 24 years ago, I thought I did everything that I could to protect people and to do the right thing. 24 years ago, and then you put it all away, and then all of a sudden, in July of 2018, I saw that guy's face on TV, and I was like, I can't even describe what you feel, because you're just like, there's just rage, and then there's just this crazy desire to get to the bottom of it. Like, I want to know everything now. That's why night after night, I've gone through Perkins, I've gone through every one of OSU's documents, thousands of PDFs, read every single one of them to find out the truth. Because I just can't stop now, because I was so deceived back then.
It was an ugly truth, wasn't it?
Oh, it was terrible. And I mean, OSU to this day won't let people know what the real truth is. There's a lot of stuff going on that's not, some of it's not in the Perkins report, and some of it is, and some of it's still going on.
What was most startling to you that you say really hasn't been out in the public arena yet?
Well, the first thing that I would like OSU to explain, and I think that the media needs to press them on, is that in 2018 they released his personnel file. It was 228 pages and not one negative comment in any of that. Now with this Perkins report, there are thousands of PDFs that have letters from their attorneys and everything else. So I would want to question their motives. Why did you release that to the public when we as survivors needed the public to believe us, not to doubt us? And you released a personnel file that said that he was absolutely perfect.
Have they been whitewashing this the entire time, even today?
Well, here's what they did to me, is that when I requested my information, I had to fight them a little bit. And there's still some shady stuff that went on with the director of HR there. But I had to fight them, and I got 5 pages of information that was the minimal amount of information that they could give me that would tell me what my complaint was, and that's it. So later in December, when Perkins reached out to me and they knew about the meeting, I did another public information request and said, I want to know if you have any documentation of my meeting. And I have email documentation for 5 months. I went back and forth with OSU and said, I want this documentation. The law requires you to release it to me. And they just ignored me for 5 months. They would write and say, working on it. And I know that they weren't working on it because they gave it to Perkins already. So then finally, after 5 months, I emailed Dr. Drake and I emailed the Board of Trustees and copied the media and said, you guys are breaking the law and I want an answer. You either tell me this exists or it doesn't exist. And that night they gave me a FERPA waiver and said, if you sign this, we'll give you your paperwork. And I remember joking with Josh that night. I said, watch, Perkins will drop tomorrow. And by God, that's exactly what happened. 20 minutes after they sent me the other 16 pages that they legally should have sent me back when they sent my original request, Perkins drops. And that just infuriates me. It just makes me understand exactly what The Ohio State University is. And the only thing that's missing from OSU now versus, as Dr. Drake likes to say, the OSU of 20, 30, 40 years ago, is another Strauss. Because the way that they're acting, the way that they're conducting themselves, and just writing their own rules and breaking the law, there's no difference than what they were back then from what they are today.
You know, you are a graduate of that university, aren't you?
Master's degree in there.
And when you hear, you know, you say, I wanted to protect this from happening to anybody else. And when you learned it had already happened to hundreds of young men, how did that make you feel?
I mean, Brian Garrett is a perfect example. He's one of the people that have been very vocal. And Brian Garrett happened after Ted Grace. So had they done what they should have done after me, Brian would have never been affected. We've become friends. I mean, I just retired from the Army and he came to my retirement party the other night. What kind of a crazy thing is it when you're bonding with somebody over this trauma like this? We become friends because of it. And it's insane to think how many people were affected, and you just feel like you failed them all.
And how many of those young men, you know, you say you don't know what you're going to do until you're in that position. So many of them were silent.
Well, I think that, I questioned whether they were silent. I think some of them told who they thought that they could tell, their coaches, their teachers, or, the director of student health. And as much as I saw them shut me down back then, I can only imagine that it was the same response from everybody. And I was persistent. I had been in the Army. I was a little bit older than people. I didn't stop. I was like, I want a meeting. And I kept going. And then I said, I want a letter. Thank God I asked for that letter. If I wouldn't ask for that letter, that might be the only proof that anybody has that they lied to us.
They lied to you, and they lied, and they protected him. You know, we're also hearing from this Perkins report that there were complaints and people observing how often he was going into the showers in a voyeuristic way with these young men.
Right.
This was out in the open.
It's-
Are you shocked that that was going on too?
You know, honestly, after going through what I went through, he was so brazen and arrogant by the time, I mean, I was, at the end because it was 95. And I think that he had gotten so arrogant that just the stuff he said to me alone, I don't know if it increases as time goes on, that he feels more confident. But it's just, I couldn't believe what he did to me. So it wasn't shocking what I saw that he did to other people. But the amount of people, you feel so betrayed. And then you feel, it just makes you feel so enraged.
Do you think the university failed you and failed all those other young men?
Oh, there's not a doubt. They're failing us today. That's the thing, is that the way that they're arrogantly and just smugly handling everything. Their PR people were saying, we want to determine what may have happened and who may have known, when there were already like dozens of people that had come forward. I was one of them. And I had on their letterhead what happened and who knew, and I received that from them. And tell me how that makes you feel when you hear them telling the public, we're trying to figure out what may have happened and who may have known, when they gave me the paperwork. They know. They knew what happened and who knew. And that just makes you so angry, because you're liars.
What should happen now? I know you're part of a lawsuit, and people are saying, well, these guys now, they just want to profit off of all this. How do you respond to that kind of criticism?
So my thing is that, number one, I think that, and I've suggested this, I think that when, not a PR stunt, that's how I would feel that they should handle it. Not saying we're going to be a sexual assault task force without any details. I mean, I watched all 3 news channels when they announced that, and every single news channel said there aren't any details yet. And then we didn't hear anything for months. And then all of a sudden, the leader of their sexual assault task force is the dean of their college of law. Does he have, some kind of experience in sexual assault? Is he a survivor? What's his qualifications other than he's a lawyer? Because then that makes me think that their only priority with this whole thing is legally, is protecting themselves. I think starting with not being fake and really making an effort like that. The other thing is that I had suggested, and I keep suggesting this, that I think that we would not have a Me Too movement if it was the law that if a second person ever came forward, the first person has a right to know that there was a similar complaint. I think that should be the law in every university, in every school, in every business, because if that was the case, then you would empower that person to have the knowledge that there had been another complaint. And I think that I've talked to legislators about that. I think that should be the case. I think Ohio State could step up and they could make that their own university rule if they really wanted to stop this from happening. But all they're concerned about is the PR damage and everything that's happening. They're throwing the medical board under the bus. I mean, they don't really care about anything except making themselves look good in this and waiting for the next football game till people forget about it. And that's frustrating.
Do you think people will forget about it? I mean, the reality is it's Michigan week and everybody.
That's the thing, is that
they know that works in their favor. Right?
I know, and it's disappointing. And I think that people don't mean to do that, but I think that if anybody had a kid that was affected by this, I think that if any one of those board of trustees kids were affected by this, everything would be different. Everything. What I was saying about the medical board is that, Ohio State was quick to announce that they wanted to put the medical board inclusion thing in the Perkins-Coie report. And I thought instantly something's up with that, because there's a motivation for them to want to do this so badly, because I've never seen, in my experience, they've not been transparent about anything. So if they're saying they want so badly to be transparent about something, it benefits them. And so sure enough, you heard Governor DeWine talking about the failures of the medical board. But then as I read through the documents, I find a couple really interesting documents that weren't in the Perkins report. One of them was that the medical board reached out to OSU's lawyers and said, we want you guys to file a complaint against Strauss, because the original complaint that came in was against his boss, Grace, that Strauss filed against him, which was kind of crazy. But he filed a complaint, and in this complaint, they start talking to people and say, wait a minute, this guy's molesting kids? And so they went to OSU and wrote him a letter and told him, we want you to file a complaint. Did OSU do that? No. And then beyond that, there's another letter that I found that I think it was Judy Brady that told them that they wanted to keep this Strauss matter confidential. They told the medical board that. So those 2 documents are pretty interesting. I would love to know the behind the scenes on that. The other thing is that there was another document from Strauss's lawyer that he basically said rumor and innuendo are rampant across the whole Ohio State University community, as well as other universities. So he wrote that to OSU's lawyers and the vice president of student affairs. Everybody knew that. And so when the media is always asking who knew what, I mean, Strauss's own lawyer back in the 90s was saying everybody knows. So then I think that the onus for anybody that says that they didn't know would be to say, you need to explain how you didn't know, because it seems to me that his own lawyer was complaining that everybody knew.
So when you hear Jim Jordan and other university officials say, I didn't know that was going on, do you believe them?
So I think that an appropriate response from anybody in this situation should be to take a little bit of ownership and say, you know what, I was there, and by God, if I could have done something, I mean, my heart goes out to these people. I think a human response to say, I feel responsible even if I didn't know. I don't think that I would just say, no, I didn't know or whatever. But I think that the burden of proof would be against almost anybody that was that close to anybody, wrestlers, student health. Ted Grace works in another university right now, today, in the same position that he did in OSU, and that infuriates me. I testified to the House of Representatives, and I told them, I said, this guy's working today for kids. He's in charge of kids, and he had the misjudgment to lie to me and basically let this happen to kids after me.
And not protect students.
Not protect them. So, you know what? I think that the university over there needs to look at that. I know that the Ohio State Medical Board probably is going to take his license away, and that'll be a day that I'll feel vindicated when they do that.
And what university is he at right now?
It's Southern Illinois, Carbondale.
Okay.
So he's in Illinois.
So what, for you, you said you've spent hours going through thousands of papers. You continue to advocate. You are organizing. You are making sure that this does not die. Why are you doing that?
Because I was lied to, and I want the truth. I mean, it's so hurtful. That's one of my biggest principles is that, number one, I think that, and I've advocated my whole life for LGBT community, and I advocate to use the power of your voice for change. Here's an irony for you. In 2015, OSU asked me to come and headline their TED Talk. It was called The Human Narrative, and I was the headliner. I was the ending one that everything was building up to in front of 4,000 people, and I got a standing ovation for trust the power of your voice. And the last line of that whole thing was I said, you never understand the power of your voice. You could change the world. And that's how I closed it, to a standing ovation. That was 2015. OSU celebrated that. 2018, they're trying to shut me down and trying to quiet me again. And so, I feel like that part of who I am is to be a fighter and to be a voice for people that don't have a voice. I talked to one of the judges. We were telling them stories, and all the survivors were going around telling them stories. And I physically wanted to vomit listening to them. And one of the things it was an incredible moment, but I told them, I said, you guys, I want you to know that listening to what this guy did to you, I'm gay, and I think it's so horrific what that guy did to you, and it makes me so sick to my stomach of what you guys could possibly think of gay people. And I just hope you know that that's so wrong, and that nobody feels that. And these guys came up and hugged me afterwards. And we had these wrestlers that were abused by this guy came up and hugged me, and we bonded over that. And I just thought that was an incredible moment that just shows the resiliency of people.
I wondered whether or not, because he was doing this to young men, people would confuse homosexuality with this predator.
Yeah, please don't, because it's not. I mean, it was me and Student C were the two that ended up getting him suspended, and I was gay, so a gay person advocated and got rid of that guy. I feel that Strauss probably had some kind of a mental illness to do what he did. I don't think anybody could just do something like that without a mental illness. Ted Grace did not. Sessions, any of their bosses did not. There were a lot of people that protected him that did not have a mental illness. And I think that these are all the people that didn't want to talk to Perkins. I mean, Sessions alone, one of the things that is interesting about him is he was on that email that said it was rampant across the university, and he was on these chains of things. He went on to become the interim president and presided over the Board of Trustees meeting where Strauss was made emeritus. And you just can't, I just want these people to explain themselves. It's just crazy to think that.
Yeah, when he got emeritus status, it was almost, don't you think, as if the university was saying, you got away with it. It's okay, go off quietly into the sunset.
I mean, it sure felt like that for us because it's just like a kick in the throat, you know. And I mean,
and the reality is Strauss isn't here to face the music.
no, and that's something I say is that OSU robbed our ability to ever really confront him, knowing what he did. And one thing that I'll say about, you know, President Drake and the university is when they put out their apology in it, I think at least 4 or 5 times referenced the university from years ago. Really adamant to make sure that that language was in that apology to us. Strauss's family apologized to us. His wife, who he divorced in the 70s, and his son apologized and said they felt so regretted that we've gone through this. Not once did his wife say, hey, I divorced him, but that's not what Drake did. You know, so it's like, you just think that, I just wish that Ohio State University and the president of the university had the integrity of Strauss's ex-wife.
Don't you feel for his son?
Oh, I mean, I feel for their whole family. I just, you know, I can't imagine being in the place of this, you know, this wife who, you know, he was on all of his personnel paperwork and stuff, and, you know, he drug her through a lot of this, but he divorced her probably close to the beginning of OSU. But I just, and then for her to have the character to stand up to us and say, I am so sorry, but not to have to put an asterisk on it or say that was 20, 40, 30, 40 years ago. You know, I mean, that's character, and OSU needs to learn that.
Well,